In 1206, a man named Temujin stood before the fractured tribes of the Mongolian steppe. He had been abandoned as a child, enslaved by rivals, betrayed by allies. And yet, on that day, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler. What followed would change the course of human history. In less than 60 years, his descendants would command an empire stretching from the Danube River to the Pacific Ocean, the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. Cities fell, kingdoms collapsed, entire civilizations trembled at the sound of approaching hooves. But here's what most history books never tell you. The Mongols didn't conquer the world through brutality alone. They built one of the first global communication networks in history. They enforced religious tolerance across vast and diverse populations. They connected East and West, igniting what some would call the first wave of globalization. This wasn't just destruction, it was calculated, systematic innovation. So why are they remembered only as destroyers? Because the same force that made them unstoppable may have also made them unsustainable. This is the Mongol paradox. An empire powerful enough to conquer the world, yet too fragile to hold it. So what went wrong? And what happens when speed becomes your greatest strength and your fatal weakness? Welcome to the History Decoder. By his 30s, Temujin had gathered followers, but he faced a problem every steppe leader encountered: tribal loyalty. A warrior might follow you today, but when his cousin called from another tribe tomorrow, he'd abandon you without hesitation. Temujin's solution was radical. After defeating the powerful Tatar tribe, he didn't just absorb them, he dismantled them. He scattered Tatar families across his own units. He placed loyal commanders, regardless of birth, in charge. He created new military units where a Mongol, a Tatar, and a Merkit fought side by side as brothers. This wasn't assimilation, it was alchemy. He forged a new identity, Mongol, not by blood, but by oath. When he gathered the tribes at the Onon River in 1206, he didn't just declare himself Khan, he declared a new social contract. Your loyalty to me transcends your tribe. Your merit determines your rank. Your courage earns your place. For the first time in steppe history, a shepherd's son could rise to command armies. A former enemy could become a trusted general. This was the Mongol Revolution, not conquest, meritocracy. While Europe operated on feudal whim and tribal custom, Genghis Khan created something unprecedented: a written legal code for nomads. The Yasa wasn't carved on stone tablets. It lived in the hearts of his people, but its principles were absolute. Steal a horse, death. Abandon a comrade in battle, death. Harm a merchant under Mongol protection, death. Harsh, yes, but revolutionary in its consistency. For the first time on the steppe, justice didn't depend on your tribe or your connections. It depended on your actions. The Yasa also contained surprising innovations: religious freedom. Genghis consulted Buddhist monks, Muslim imams, Christian priests, and Taoist masters, not as subjects, but as advisors. He declared, "Heaven has given different religions to different peoples. Let them all pray." Women's rights. His daughters married conquered kings to secure alliances, but they ruled as regents, commanded armies, and shaped policy. His wife Berta managed the entire Eastern Empire while he campaigned west. Environmental protection. The Yasa banned hunting during breeding seasons. It punished those who polluted water sources. It required replanting of sacred groves. This wasn't primitive law. It was sophisticated governance, designed for mobility, The Yasa turned scattered tribes into a unified nation. It created trust where there had been only suspicion. It made the impossible possible, a nomadic empire that could administer cities it had never seen. Let's correct a dangerous myth right now. The Mongols didn't win through brutality alone. Every empire used terror. The Assyrians flayed prisoners alive. The Romans crucified thousands. What made the Mongols different was their system. First, communication. While European armies relied on messengers who might take weeks to return, the Mongols created the yam, a relay network of horse stations spaced a day's ride apart. A rider would gallop to the next station, hand his message to a fresh rider on a fresh horse, and rest. Information traveled 200 miles a day across continents. Second, intelligence. Before attacking a city, Mongol scouts spent months gathering intelligence. They learned the commander's habits, the city's water sources, the political fractures within the walls. They knew their enemies better than the enemies knew themselves. Third, psychological warfare. Yes, they sometimes destroyed cities that resisted, but this was strategic, not sadistic. When the Khwarezmian Shah executed Mongol envoys, a grave diplomatic insult, Genghis didn't just attack, he made an example. But for cities that surrendered, he offered protection, lower taxes, religious freedom. Merchants who cooperated became wealthy. Artisans were spared and relocated to serve the empire. This wasn't mindless slaughter. It was calculated policy. Resist and face annihilation. Cooperate and thrive. Most chose to cooperate. The Mongols conquered China not with overwhelming force, but by recruiting Chinese engineers to build siege engines, Chinese administrators to govern cities, Chinese doctors to heal their wounded. Their greatest weapon wasn't the composite bow, it was adaptability. In 1211, Genghis Khan faced his greatest challenge yet. Before him stood the Jin dynasty, 60 million people protected by massive fortress walls, advanced artillery, and professional armies that had ruled northern China for generations. Behind him stood fewer than 100,000 Mongol warriors, nomadic horsemen who had never conquered a proper city. Conventional wisdom said they would be crushed. But Genghis Khan had spent his life defying conventional wisdom. Instead of attacking fortified cities head-on like every steppe leader before him, he did something revolutionary. He bypassed them entirely. While Jin generals waited confidently behind their walls, Mongol cavalry swept around them like a desert storm, burning supply lines, cutting communications, and terrorizing the countryside. The Jin cities became isolated islands, well fortified but starving, well armed but cut off. When their army finally marched out to fight, they found themselves surrounded on open ground, exactly where Mongol horse archers excelled. The Jin forces were destroyed not through superior numbers, but through superior strategy. But Genghis Khan's true genius went far beyond military victory. He absorbed. He recruited Jin engineers, the very men who had designed artillery against him, and put them to work building siege weapons for the Mongols. He appointed Jin bureaucrats to administer conquered territories, recognizing that local officials understood complex tax systems better than any outsider. He adopted Jin agricultural techniques to feed his growing empire, learning to cultivate rice paddies and manage irrigation systems completely foreign to steppe nomads. This pattern repeated across Asia with remarkable consistency. In Persia, the Mongols preserved sophisticated Ghanat irrigation systems instead of destroying them as spoils of war. In Russia, They maintained local princes as tax collectors, allowing nobility to retain titles while serving the greater Mongol system. In China, they kept the civil service examination system intact, the very institution that had produced scholar officials who once opposed them. The Mongols didn't erase cultures. They curated them. They didn't impose uniformity. They harvested expertise. They saw conquered peoples not as subjects to subjugate, but as resources to integrate. By the time Genghis Khan died in 1227, his empire stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen. But his greatest achievement wasn't the land he conquered or battles he won. It was the system he built, designed not for one man's glory, but for perpetual expansion. A system so flexible it could transform shepherds into administrators and nomads into empire builders. And that brilliant, adaptable system would soon face its greatest test. When Genghis Khan died, the empire should have shattered. Steppe tradition demanded division among sons. Rival tribes would seize the moment to rebel. Instead, his third son, Ögedei, did something unprecedented. He honored his father's system. At the Kurultai, the Great Council of Chiefs, Ögedei didn't claim power through birthright alone. He earned it through consensus. He promised continuity, stability, expansion, and he delivered. While European kings fought over inches of land, Ögedei launched campaigns on 3 fronts simultaneously: west into Russia and Eastern Europe, south into the Song dynasty of China, southwest into the Abbasid Caliphate. But Ögedei's true genius wasn't military, it was administrative. He established Karakorum as the empire's capital, not a grand city, but a functional hub where Persian astronomers, Chinese engineers, and European merchants worked side by side. He formalized the Yam system into an imperial postal network with over 1,400 stations. He created the first international passport, the paisa, a tablet of gold, silver, or wood that granted safe passage to merchants, diplomats, and monks across continents. With the paisa in hand, a Venetian merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing without fear of robbery or arrest. This wasn't just efficient governance, it was the birth of globalization. Ögedei understood what his father had planted. An empire built on connection would outlast an empire built on conquest, and for 30 years under his rule, it did. Imagine a network where information travels faster than armies, where a message from Beijing reaches Budapest in 10 days, where merchants, spies, and diplomats move freely across continents. This was the Yam. At its peak, the Yam stretched over 5,000 miles, with stations every 25 miles. Each station housed fresh horses, food, and shelter for authorized travelers. But the Yam was more than a postal system. It was the empire's nervous system. When a rebellion sparked in Persia, Ögedei knew within days, not months. When famine threatened China, grain shipments were redirected before starvation set in. When European envoys arrived with gifts, the court was prepared to receive them. The Yam created something revolutionary: predictability. For the first time in human history, distance was no longer a barrier to governance. But the Yam's greatest impact was invisible. Along its routes traveled more than messages. Chinese gunpowder reached Europe. Persian astronomy transformed Chinese calendars. Indian mathematics revolutionized Mongol accounting. A Nestorian Christian monk from Baghdad could debate theology with a Buddhist scholar from Tibet, both traveling under Mongol protection. The Yam didn't just carry information, It carried ideas, and ideas, once unleashed, cannot be contained. When Marco Polo's father and uncle traveled east in 1260, they weren't brave explorers venturing into the unknown. They were businessmen using an established international highway. The Mongols hadn't just connected continents. They had created a single economic and cultural zone, the first truly global community. Historians would later call this era Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, not because there was no war, but because within the empire's borders, travel was safer than it had been for 1,000 years. In 1254, a French king sent a letter to the Mongol Khan, "Convert to Christianity, and we will be allies." The Khan's reply survives to this day. "Heaven has given different religions to different peoples. You may keep yours, we will keep ours." This wasn't mere politeness, it was state policy. While the Crusades burned across the Middle East, the Mongol court hosted debates between Buddhist monks, Muslim scholars, Christian priests, and Taoist masters. Genghis Khan's grandson, Mongol Khan, once declared, "Just as God gave different fingers to the hand, so has he given different religions to mankind." This tolerance wasn't born of modern liberalism, it was pragmatic genius. In Persia, Mongol rulers patronized Islamic architecture and appointed Muslim viziers. In China, they restored Confucian temples and consulted Taoist sages. In Russia, they protected Orthodox churches and exempted clergy from taxes. Why? Because religious leaders controlled hearts and minds. Winning their loyalty was cheaper than crushing their followers. When the Mongols conquered Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate, they didn't destroy Islamic scholarship, they preserved it. Hulagu Khan, who led the campaign, appointed a Persian Muslim named Nasir al-Din al-Tusi to rebuild the House of Wisdom. Under Mongol patronage, al-Tusi created the most accurate astronomical tables of the medieval world. In China, Kublai Khan didn't suppress Buddhism or Confucianism. He blended them with Mongol traditions to create a new imperial identity. This wasn't cultural erasure, it was cultural curation. The Mongols understood a truth many empires miss. You cannot govern diverse peoples by forcing them to be the same. You govern them by allowing them to be different, while binding them to a common system. Religious tolerance wasn't weakness, it was the glue that held the empire together. And for 50 years, it worked brilliantly. Before the Mongols, the Silk Road was a dangerous myth. Bandits haunted the passes. Local warlords demanded exorbitant tolls. Diseases spread unchecked through crowded caravanserais. A merchant traveling from China to Europe faced near-certain death. The Mongols changed everything. They stationed permanent garrisons along trade routes. They punished bandits with death, not just for the crime, but as a warning to others. They standardized weights, measures, and currency across continents. For the first time, a bolt of Chinese silk could be sold in Venice with confidence it hadn't been adulterated. The results were explosive. Trade volume increased tenfold. New goods flooded markets. Chinese porcelain appeared in Persian palaces. Persian carpets adorned Mongol tents. Indian spices seasoned European feasts. But goods were just the beginning. Knowledge traveled too. Chinese printing technology reached Europe, paving the way for Gutenberg's press. Persian medical texts transformed Chinese medicine. Arabic numerals revolutionized Mongol accounting. People traveled. Rabban Bar Sauma, a Nestorian monk from Beijing, journeyed to Rome, Paris, and Bordeaux, meeting kings and popes as an official Mongol envoy. Ibn Battuta, the great Moroccan traveler, crossed the entire empire safely, marveling at its diversity and order. This wasn't just trade, it was a cultural explosion. The Black Death would later travel these same routes, a tragic consequence of connection. But in the 13th century, the Silk Road under Mongol protection represented humanity's greatest leap toward global unity. Cities boomed. Samarkand became a cosmopolitan hub where Turkish poets, Persian scholars, and Chinese artisans collaborated. Tabriz in Persia grew to 500,000 people, larger than Paris or London. Khanbalik, modern Beijing, became the world's most cosmopolitan capital, with communities of Europeans, Persians, Indians, and Southeast Asians living under Mongol rule. The Mongols hadn't just opened trade routes, they had created the world's first multicultural society, and in doing so, they planted seeds that would blossom centuries later. In 1279, Kublai Khan completed his grandfather's dream. The Song dynasty of southern China surrendered. For the first time in history, all of China was united under foreign rule. But Kublai didn't rule as a conqueror. He ruled as a Chinese emperor. He adopted the mandate of heaven. He restored the Grand Canal. He patronized Chinese arts and sciences. Meanwhile, his cousins ruled other parts of the empire. The Ilkhanate in Persia blended Mongol and Islamic traditions. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia became a center of Turkic culture. The Golden Horde in Russia collected taxes but left local princes in power. On paper, this was a unified empire stretching from the Pacific to the Danube. In reality, cracks were forming. Distance was the enemy. A message from Karakorum to the Golden Horde took 3 weeks. By the time a decision reached the frontier, circumstances had changed. Cultural assimilation accelerated the fracture. Mongols in Persia converted to Islam. Mongols in China adopted Confucian rituals. Mongols in Russia intermarried with local nobility. The very tolerance that had built the empire was now dissolving its unity. Kublai Khan tried to hold it together. He declared himself Emperor of China. He built a new capital at Khanbalik. He launched naval expeditions to Japan and Java. But the empire had grown too vast, too diverse, too complex. The system Genghis Khan designed for expansion had no mechanism for consolidation. Speed had built the empire, but speed couldn't sustain it. The Mongol Empire had reached its zenith, and like all peaks, what follows is descent. When Kublai Khan died in 1294, the empire didn't just fragment, it shattered. Genghis Khan's system had always depended on one thing: a single, undisputed Khan. Without that center, the centrifugal forces of culture, distance, and ambition tore the empire apart. The Ilkhanate in Persia declared independence. The Golden Horde in Russia stopped sending tribute. The Chagatai Khanate fractured into rival factions. This wasn't betrayal, it was inevitability. The Mongol system had no constitution, no clear succession rules beyond the strongest wins, no institutions strong enough to survive weak leadership. Compare this to Rome. Rome had the Senate, the Praetorian Guard, legal frameworks that persisted through bad emperors. The Mongols had only personal loyalty to the Khan. When that loyalty fractured, nothing remained. By 1300, the unified Mongol Empire existed only in memory. 4 independent Khanates ruled vast territories, cooperating sometimes, warring often. The Yam network decayed. Bandits returned to the Silk Road. Religious tolerance gave way to sectarian conflict. The Pax Mongolica was over. But here's what historians often miss. The fragmentation wasn't a failure of Mongol governance. It was the logical conclusion of their design. Genghis Khan built a system optimized for one thing: rapid expansion. He never solved the next problem: sustainable consolidation. Speed requires simplicity. Stability requires complexity. The Mongols mastered the first. They never addressed the second. This wasn't stupidity, it was focus. Genghis Khan's mission was clear: unite the tribes, conquer the known world, create a system that rewarded merit and loyalty. He accomplished all three. Let's confront the central paradox of the Mongol Empire. The very qualities that enabled its lightning expansion also guaranteed its fragmentation. Speed required simplicity. The YAM network worked because it was standardized. But standardization couldn't accommodate the complex bureaucracies of Persia, China, and Russia. Local administrators eventually demanded autonomy, and got it. Meritocracy undermined tradition. Promoting a shepherd's son over a noble's heir created fierce loyalty among the promoted, but it created bitter resentment among the displaced. When central authority weakened, those resentments exploded into civil war. Tolerance prevented unity. Allowing Persians to be Persian and Chinese to be Chinese preserved local stability, but it prevented the creation of a shared Mongol identity beyond loyalty to the Khan. When the Khan's authority faded, so did the empire. Mobility sacrificed permanence. Mongol tents could be packed and moved in hours. Perfect for conquest, fatal for legacy. While Romans built stone roads that lasted millennia, Mongols built systems of relationships that lasted one generation. This wasn't a flaw in character, it was a flaw in design. Genghis Khan solved the problem of his time: how to unite fractious tribes and conquer sedentary civilizations. He never solved the problem of the next generation: how to transform a conquest machine into a sustainable civilization. No empire has ever mastered both. Rome expanded slowly and lasted centuries. Alexander expanded rapidly and collapsed immediately. The Mongols were the ultimate expression of the speed paradox. The faster you build, the faster you fall. But this raises a deeper question. Was the empire's fragmentation truly a failure? Or was its true purpose not to last forever, but to connect the world? In 1346, Mongol troops besieging the Crimean port of Kaffa catapulted plague-infected corpses over the walls. Whether this event actually spread the disease is debated by historians, but what's undeniable is that the very routes the Mongols secured now carried death across continents. The Black Death traveled the Silk Road. It reached Europe on Genoese merchant ships that had traded in Mongol ports. Within 5 years, 1/3 of Europe was dead. This was the dark side of connection. The Mongols had created the world's first global network. But networks carry both blessings and curses. Ideas travel, technologies travel, diseases travel. The Mongols couldn't have known about bacteria. They couldn't have foreseen the pandemic, but they created the conditions for it. This isn't moral judgment, it's historical insight. Every system of connection carries unintended consequences. The Roman roads that spread law also spread legionnaires. The British railways that connected India also enabled colonial exploitation. The internet that connects us also spreads misinformation. The Mongols were the first to face this dilemma at a global scale. They chose connection over isolation, knowledge over ignorance, exchange over fear. And yes, that choice came with its own set of risks, but consider the alternative: a world of isolated civilizations, no exchange of ideas, no shared knowledge, no collective progress. The Black Death was horrific. However, the world that emerged after it underwent a transformation. Labor shortages empowered peasants. Questioning authority paved the way for the Renaissance. Global awareness began to dawn. The Mongols didn't cause the plague, but their empire created the conditions for a new world to emerge from the ashes. Sometimes, establishing a connection necessitates the courage to confront unforeseen consequences. The Mongols had that courage. Do we? When we think of the Mongols, we remember the conquests. We should remember the connections. In Russia, the Mongols ruled for 240 years, but they didn't destroy Russian culture. They centralized administration. They introduced census-taking and tax systems. They connected Russia to global trade networks. Ivan the Terrible didn't reject Mongol rule. He adopted Mongol titles, court rituals, and administrative practices. The word Tsar comes from Caesar, but the concept of autocratic rule came from the Khans. In China, Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty wasn't a foreign occupation. It was a golden age of cultural exchange. Chinese drama flourished. Blue and white porcelain reached its peak. Marco Polo's accounts inspired generations of European explorers. In Persia, the Ilkhanate patronized the greatest scientific minds of the age. Rashid al-Din's Compendium of Chronicles, the first world history, was commissioned by Mongol rulers. Persian miniature painting absorbed Chinese influences under Mongol patronage. In Europe, the Mongols never conquered Europe, but they transformed it. Gunpowder technology arrived via Mongol routes. Paper money concepts inspired European banking. Geographic knowledge expanded European horizons. But the Mongols' greatest legacy isn't in any single culture. It's in the idea itself. Diverse peoples can be connected under a single system. The United Nations, the European Union, the Internet. These are all attempts to solve the Mongol paradox. How to connect without conquering. How to unify without erasing. How to build systems that honor difference while creating unity. The Mongols failed to sustain their empire, but they succeeded in something greater. They proved that connection is possible, that the world is smaller than we think, that our fates are intertwined. In an age of walls and isolationism, this lesson has never been more urgent. Today, on the Mongolian steppe, life still echoes the age of Genghis Khan. Across vast, open grasslands, nomads herd sheep and horses as they have for centuries. They live in gurs, portable homes of felt and wood. They drink airag, fermented mare's milk, a tradition unchanged by time. But look closer. Those same gurs are crowned with satellite dishes. Herders check the weather on smartphones. Children video call relatives in distant cities from the middle of nowhere. This isn't contradiction, it's continuity. The Mongols were never opposed to change. They were masters of adaptation. When they needed siege engines, they turned to Chinese engineers. When they needed governance, they relied on Persian administrators. When they needed legitimacy, they embraced the traditions of the lands they ruled. Their strength was never in resisting the new. It was in absorbing what worked and making it their own. And today, that lesson matters more than ever. We live in an age where challenges move faster than ever before. Climate change crosses borders without warning. Pandemics spread in weeks, not years. Economic shocks ripple instantly across continents. Isolation is not the answer. Connection is, but connection guided by wisdom. The Mongols understood something we are still learning. Speed alone is not strength. Without sustainability, it leads to collapse. But connection, true connection, creates resilience. Even in times of crisis, survival has never depended on isolation alone. It has depended on the exchange of knowledge, the sharing of ideas, the ability to adapt. The Mongol Empire itself was short-lived as a unified force, but its legacy never disappeared. You see it every time a passport is stamped, every time goods cross oceans, every time a message travels instantly across the world. We are living in the world they helped shape. A world where distance is no longer a barrier, where diversity is not a weakness, but a strength, where our shared humanity matters more than our divisions. The empire fell, but the idea remained. And ideas, once unleashed, do not die. They evolve, they spread, they shape the future. Next time on the History Decoder, we journey east, beyond the steppe, beyond the edges of empire, into one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. From the legendary Yellow Emperor to the rise and fall of dynasties, from the Great Wall to inventions that reshaped human history, paper, gunpowder, printing, the compass. This is not just the story of a nation. It is the story of endurance, of a civilization that did not collapse, but transformed again and again for over 4,000 years. Ancient China, where power was measured not only in conquest, but in culture, philosophy, and the ability to adapt without losing identity. Subscribe, and remember,